Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session. Greetings on behalf of the University of Graz. So this lecture series is a cooperation between the University of Graz, the Kelman Institute, and and the University of Denver. But this was only to open the session, and I will hand over to Werner Wintersteiner from the University of Klagenfurt to introduce this the specific setting and the topics and the speakers of today's session. Werner, please.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever is your time zone. Very welcome back, or maybe it's the first time for this wonderful lecture series, which we started a week ago. And it continues today with two very interesting speakers, Oliver Ramsbotham from Bradford University, and Ofer Zalzberg from the Kelman Institute, Jerusalem, with discussant Susan Allen that many of you have already listened to last week with her wonderful intervention, and she will, from her perspective, comment the two papers. Unfortunately, Oliver Ramsbotham cannot be with us, but he has a video and he will give us this video lecture. And afterwards, it's all over Zalzberg, and you see him already. He's here in the middle of a very difficult situation in Jerusalem, I think, just in this very moment. Okay. I will present you every speaker in the moment when they are speaking. So I start with Oliver Ramsbotham. He's Professor Emeritus of Conflict Resolution at the University of Bradford, which is a very renowned for their peace education and peace research department. And he is the former head of Department of Peace Studies there, director of Oxford Research Group, president of the Conflict Research Society, and so on. He's a service editor together with Tom Woodhouse of the Routledge Studies in Peace and Conflict Resolution. And in this series, there is also a book with select texts of Herbert Kelman. So you see also this connection. And his recent books include Contemporary Conflict Resolution, also together with Tom Woodhouse, also from Bradford University, or Transforming Violent Conflict, or When Conflict Resolution Fails. Today, he will speak about his chapter in the book, which is on because as many of you already know, this book is the background of this lecture series, and but Oliver will have an adapted version, a very timely version of his paper. And the title he has chosen is Acknowledging, Understanding, and Adapting to the Complexity of Radical Disagreement. The word complexity, I guess you heard it last time, and you will hear it anytime, because it's one of the key, not topics, but the key approaches to conflict resolution in our lecture. And the radical disagreement is a very key concept of Oliver Ramsbotham, and I wonder if Ofer Zalzberg will not say this is very close to his own research and his own concept. So please, Xenia, could you start the video? It's about 20 minutes with Oliver Ramsbotham's intervention.
Greetings to everyone. It's very strange speaking in this disembodied way over Zoom, but there we are. I'm so sorry I can't be more actively with you. Special thanks to the Graz team for creating and driving this project over so many years. To you, Tamra, for shaping the book conceptually and taking on the onerous task of seeing it through publication, and to Xenia for helping me make this presentation, which represents my own contribution. I've been asked to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. My chapter is called Acknowledging, Understanding, and Adapting to the Complexity of Radical Disagreement. Evidently, the current disaster in Gaza is the very opposite of what we are all trying to achieve. It has come about since our book was published and now eclipses most other considerations. We do not know its short-term, yet alone longer-term outcome. Nevertheless, I think that it graphically illustrates many of the themes in our book. So how does my chapter fit into these themes? The focus of the book is intractability, particularly as seen through what Tamra Desre calls a complexity lens. It explores how existing forms of interactive problem solving and conflict transformation need to be adapted in the light of this. As Peter Kelman puts it, how can interactive conflict engagement 1 be enhanced to become interactive conflict engagement 2? The book is a tribute to the remarkable work of Herbert Kelman. My own chapter explores ways in which Kelman's interactive problem-solving approach can be extended to engage the phenomenon of radical disagreement, which in my view plays a central role in generating much of this complexity in the communicative sphere and in blocking conflict transformation attempts as a result. For example, in my contribution, I try to show how radical conceptual emotional asymmetry, that is radical disagreement, links radical material asymmetry, imbalance of power, and radical strategic asymmetry, incompatibility of goals, in generating much of the complexity that bedevils attempts to promote interactive conflict transformation. Radical disagreement, the war of words, is inseparable from the other systemic, structural, and dynamic dimensions of intense political conflict, of which it is an integral part. Human beings do not struggle silently. In the first part of my chapter, I compare assumptions of reflexivity, functionality, and equivalence in monological third-party descriptions with examples of real-life polylogical radical disagreement. On the former, I suggest that communicative conflict resolution and conflict transformation approaches have traditionally dismissed the phenomenon of radical disagreement as an all too familiar dead end, a terminus to genuine dialogue that needs from the outset to be set aside, not learnt from. It has been disparagingly referred to as adversarial debate, competitive debate, and positional debate. Something similar happens to Muffian agonism to the extent that it is defined from the beginning as non-antagonistic. And all of this, in turn, is drawn from the social sciences in general, where radical disagreement is disregarded as a superficial epiphenomenon of deeper processes that it is the job of social science to uncover. A mere rationalization of political interest, social construction, psychological projection, historical cultural conditioning, biological drives, and so on. To try to take the radical disagreement itself seriously as a research project is seen from this perspective to be both simplistic and misleading. But when we look at real-life examples of radical disagreement, we find that these reductive and subjectivizing descriptions are inadequate. That is not what conflicting parties say. That they do not say this is what makes them radical disagreements. We see this clearly in the current war of words raging in and around the war of weapons in Gaza and reverberating with alarming force throughout the region and beyond. This is a graphic example of the cross-cutting feedback and unpredictable ramifications of a complex system. The phenomenon of radical disagreement is not all too familiar, but perhaps the least familiar dimension of intense political conflict. In my chapter, I give examples to show this, which I cannot reproduce in this address. In radical disagreement, recommendation for action, how things ought to be, and ostensive justification, how things are from the outset fused together with emotion and will, which move much faster than reason. What is the radical disagreement about? At the heart of the struggle is the effort to define this. Radical disagreement is about what it is about. How far does the disagreement reach? It reaches to the far horizon, as in the process of polarization, with bewildering complexity and speed, topics appealed to are immediately found to be already part of what is in dispute. How deep does radical disagreement go? It goes as deep as the involvement of the distinctions within which the struggle is defined. Distinctions such as those between fact, value, opinion, reality, right, wrong, sincerity, insincerity, justice, injustice. Radical disagreement is the involvement of the distinction between distinctions invoked and what they do or do not distinguish. Radical disagreement is not a coexistence of relativized or subjectivized narratives or beliefs that serve a merely functional role within some supposed neutral third space that is independent of them. It is a life and death struggle to occupy the whole of conceptual space and act accordingly. It is a battle to pin the label mere, that is, mistaken perspective, on the other. That is why, in intractable cases, it is so difficult to gain a foothold for interactive conflict transformation in the communicative sphere, and why it is important, first, to explore and engage what needs to be transformed. In the immediate aftermath of the October the 7th attack, I collected and compared initial international reactions from governments. Roughly 1/3 expressed horror at the Hamas attack and offered Israel immediate support, including military aid. Another third, including the initial UN response, deplored the Hamas action, but urged that the violence must not spread. And a further third, in one way or another, combined reaction to the Hamas attack with mention of the deep provocation by Israel over many years to Palestinian national aspirations. All of this blocks interactive conflict transformation. So something else has to happen first before key constituencies are prepared to enter the process. The next part of my chapter addresses this. My argument is that in situations where so far key constituencies are not yet ready to enter inter-party conflict transformation processes or directly oppose them, it is best to start where the embattled identity groups are rather than where third parties want them to be. This means beginning in the first instance by promoting collective strategic thinking within the conflicting parties. Who are they? Where are they? Where do they want to be? How do they get there? Why are they ready to do this when they are not yet prepared to enter interactive conflict transformation? Because they want to overcome internal differences in order to attain collective strategic goals. Why can this nevertheless open new space for the possibility of a future initiation or revival of interactive conflict transformation? because of the nature of collective strategic thinking itself. Above all, in relation to the central topic of this book, this introduces awareness of conflict complexity into the process of collective strategic thinking from the beginning, and thus incorporates it at the very heart of the deliberations of the protagonists. Over recent years, this has been tested by separate, inclusive Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian strategic thinking groups I have worked with. Similar work has been done in Yemen. This is described in detail elsewhere, but from this experience, I now draw the following brief illustrations. By the way, evidently, there is no room for this at the moment in the Gaza war, but sustained internal collective strategic thinking, strategic engagement based on it, with third parties informed accordingly, should have taken place earlier, and will increasingly be needed when the question of what happens next when the war finally comes to an end is properly addressed. Who are we? By addressing this question, identity groups grapple with the complexity of internal diversity or hybridity. Conflict parties are not monolithic. Internal difference is often a main block to external accommodation. If anything, internal differences generate fiercer disagreement than differences between the parties. Nevertheless, the internal inclusiveness required to overcome internal differences in the interest of greater collective strategic strength can also help overcome problems such as re-entry and preaching to the converted. The Hamas decision to attack Israel on the 7th of October 2023 was the decision of an isolated faction, not Palestinian collective strategic thinking, and the Israeli response was a hastily devised reaction by an ultra-hardline Israeli government. Secondly, where are we? Whether possessors or challengers, this question necessitates addressing the conflict as a complex system. This can be disheartening for challengers, as, despite individual changes, the system as a whole continually falls back into its default mode. On the other hand, when change does come, it can be sudden and unexpected, as in fractal analysis and chaos theory. Analysis of relative strengths and weaknesses uncovers the paradoxes of different forms of power in relation to different rapidly changing aspects of the conflict. Third, where do we want to be? Looking to the future, collective strategic thinking highlights the dynamic aspect of complex conflicts and the radically differential impact of structural and other forms of asymmetry. Collective strategic thinking requires critical analysis and discussion of different scenarios or possible futures, not just in terms of relative desirability, undesirability, but also in terms of relative capacity to bring these about and relative likelihood that they will occur. This introduces a note of realism to wishful thinking. Short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals add further key variables. As events unfold, the kaleidoscope shifts as perceived possibilities rise and fall in saliency in response to events. Fourth, how do we get there? Progress to strategic goals is never in a straight line. A myriad of possible paths need to be orchestrated according to prior conclusions about how the various elements of the complex system relate to each other. In complex systems, inputs continually produce unexpected outputs, which therefore require constant adjustment. Here, preparation for Plan A and Plan B may add flexibility. Crucially, alternative strategic means need constant evaluation in the face of changing circumstances. We might contrast the decision of the Hamas leadership to use violence on the 7th of October 2023, with the decision of the Sinn Féin IRA leadership to shift strategic means from the armed struggle to power sharing and the ballot box in the early 1990s in Northern Ireland. Which is more successful? That becomes a key question. Within this overall context, collective strategic thinking further simultaneously addresses three main audiences. First, in relation to collective strategic thinking about internal constituencies, which I do not have time to elaborate here, the chapter moves to the second main theme of the book, local interactions, under the heading Dilemmas of Local Empowerment. Second, in relation to the opponent, even in the most intense phases of conflict, collective strategic thinking promotes looking at the chessboard from the perspective of the other, because otherwise, those who do not do this lose the game. Yet once again, even this may be enough to begin to open the door to a possible future initiation or revival of interactive conflict transformation through greater awareness of what is likely to affect the other's moods and therefore how these can best be manipulated. I call this the ambivalence of strategic engagement. Finally, enlisting third-party support is often seen as a key factor in collective strategic thinking. At regional and international levels, this is where many of the levers can be pulled that connect local struggles to wider structural asymmetry and systemic complexity. For their part, in light of the collective strategic thinking within and across the conflicting parties, third parties are better informed in detail about what and who blocks desired outcomes and how and where pressure is best applied. In the process, by the way, third parties, both theorists and practitioners, may learn that they are not neutral or impartial or disinterested, whatever their self-understandings, because this is not up to them. As the Gaza crisis shows, in our most intense political conflicts, there is no fence to sit on. In conclusion, in the last part of the chapter, I outline possible theoretical and practical implications of this. For example, in relation to Herbert Kelman's own interactive problem-solving approach, IPS, this could be extended if a prior exploration of collective strategic thinking within the identity groups were added to the repertoire, when so far IPS is premature in relation to key constituencies. Kelman's interactive problem-solving workshops made a crucial contribution in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s to what became known as the Oslo process. But as Kelman himself observed, after the collapse of the Camp David negotiations and outbreak of the Second Intifada in 2000, together with Hamas's forcible takeover of Gaza in 2007, only 2 years after the Sharon evacuation, together with Israeli reaction, the space for interactive conflict transformation drastically diminished. In this respect, the last 20 years of his life were the most frustrating. Herbert Kelman knew what the outcome should be. I quote, "The framework I propose would start with the recognition that both peoples have historic roots in the land and are deeply attached to it. That each people's pursuit of its national aspirations by military means may well lead to mutual destruction, and that the only solution lies in a historic compromise that allows each people to express its right to national self-determination, fulfill its national aspirations, and express its national identity in a state of its own within the shared land, in peaceful coexistence with the neighboring state of the other." A bold statement of this vision might describe it as a one-country, two-state solution. End of quote. But key constituencies on either side were so far unwilling to participate. In these circumstances, therefore, in conclusion, I suggest that a prior promotion of collective strategic thinking within and eventually across conflict parties, which also involves third parties informed accordingly, might provide another string to the IPS bow and help to prepare the ground for its possible future initiation or revival, even in the most intense phases of the struggle. For example, it might become clearer exactly where opposition to the one country, two state solution is located, how this can best be addressed, and by whom, within the very challenging overall context of conflict complexity. Thank you. May I wish you all the very best in your future discussions, which I much look forward to hearing about.
So virtual applause to this wonderful speech. I think this is really food for thought, but we decided to have discussions only at the very end. And as you know, unfortunately, Oliver cannot be with us, so it will be up to Susan and Ofer maybe to answer also, and to anybody else, Tamra, for instance, who feel qualified for doing this. We continue now with a second paper with Ofer Zalzberg from Jerusalem, and he's director of the Middle East program of the Herbert Kelman Institute. He earned his PhD at Trinity College in Dublin, and he always focused on conflict resolution and sanctity, for instance. He teaches also at the religious secular Beit Midrash on the interplay between Jewish tradition and modern sovereignty. He worked before as a senior analyst of the International Crisis Group for the Middle East program, and he is also well known worldwide, I guess, not only because he was a consultant for many international organizations, but also because he's very present in media, from Le Monde Diplomatique to New York Times, from Haaretz to many other, Le Figaro, for instance, and so on. So I guess even those who are not specialists came maybe across with Ofer Zalzberg. And his paper today has a title, Engaging in the Face of Non-Negotiability, from Resolution to Transformation. Ofer, we're looking forward to listening to you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Werner. And really, thank you. Maybe thank yous first to Tamra for the editing, and Wilfried, who is here, for very helpful conversations for many, many years, and Carlo Aldrovandi with wonderful comments. So I'm very grateful. And Werner, this introduction was truly humbling, and I wish my mother was here to hear it. But excessive nevertheless. And I'm also, it's very difficult to follow up after Oliver, who is so eloquent and prompt and timely, and with a wonderful English accent, and you have now to settle for my Jerusalemite accent, so I'll do my best. I'm afraid my notes are less organized, but I'm very encouraged by having Susan after me help elucidate what I said. I'll try to, I try not to read to you the paper, but to basically divide my comments to 4 points. One is about the main issue here is an attempt to try, similar to Oliver perhaps, to call on practitioners and scholars to take non-negotiability very seriously, more seriously than perhaps we have so far. And I'll explain in a second why. And then to offer a heuristic typology of non-negotiability, basically to claim that there are different kinds of non-negotiability that can stem from different origins. And it's important for us to distinguish them. Oliver ended by saying that by delving into radical disagreement, we can identify who opposes what Kelman thought is the only possible solution. And I agree with it. And in order to do it, we really need to classify and to understand what prevents resolution and not only jump to resolution. The third point is more about possibilities for unlocking non-negotiability in different ways. And hopefully it will be clear that I don't think that it's always possible to unlock non-negotiability, but that it is sometimes just part of life. And consequently, finally, I want to say something indeed about why, therefore, I think the mindset of conflict transformation is, in cases that involve non-negotiability, is preferable to a conflict resolution mindset. So, but the departure point is based on the work on basic human needs. John Burton and Kelman himself and many scholars did, I think, phenomenal work and a huge corrective to a flaw, I think, in international relations study that basically assumes that human behavior is infinitely malleable, that fundamentally power can make us shift and do things that we don't want to do if there is enough power that is applied. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that sometimes deterrence just doesn't deter, and that power has its limits. And one of the flaws is this very flaw is also evident in mainstream conflict resolution theories and approaches, which fundamentally people try to broker agreed compromises between conflict parties, like between kids. And this often takes us also to focus on the material aspects of the conflict. And sometimes it's wonderful. Compromise can be excellent and can be helpful, and is, sometimes it's a moral virtue to be able to compromise. But I think in some cases, striving for compromise is harmful and can foster escalation. And we have to be extremely clear-eyed about that and map that carefully. And Oliver touched on the linguistic phenomena of such intractability, how people express clearly the resistance to this, but I want to try and explain as much as I can what are the origins of this, different kinds of origins. And I think that as long as conflict parties, significant, powerful conflict parties, say that this disputed entity, doesn't matter if it's kids fighting over an orange or if it's two nations fighting over land, that this thing is non-negotiable, for whatever reason, then trying to drive to a compromise before first dealing with the sense that it is non-negotiable is extremely dangerous. And we need to take that sense very, very carefully, examine it, and work with it. I'm not trying to claim that the typology I offer for non-negotiability is good. I'm trying to claim that we need the typology. This is a very initial attempt. I hope others will offer a better one. So that's really the second point, that we need the typology. And I think Kelman and others showed that basic human needs can be a source for non-negotiability. Burton said that all human beings need food, need shelter, identity, security, recognition in ways that cannot be negotiated. I can't negotiate someone out of his need or her need to eat or to have shelter, or to have some kind of identity or some kind of degree of control over their lives. We can talk about how to realize it. I might eat hummus, I might eat whatever it is, pasta, but it's not about denying the basic need. And I think these things speak for themselves. So I'll go to the other kinds of non-negotiability. Enough research was there. And really, one kind of non-negotiability I try to draw attention to is routinized interactions between individuals. I give the example of two employees in a place of work. They have a regular weekly meeting, let's say a boss and an employee or whatever it is. It's at the last hour of the working day. But the first employee has to leave in order to pick up young kids from a busy street corner where it's very dangerous for them to wait, or maybe to go and replace a home nurse and take care of the ailing parent. So when the first person, the other employee, is late, The second person finds that violent, offensive towards them. This is institutionalized. That nurse is going to leave and my mom needs my help. And it's not negotiable. It's that I don't care that you are late. There is nothing I can do about it. I can't shift the other thing. This is different from human needs. Human needs are about the social components of individual dispositions, behavior, self-identity. Here, however, we have a source of non-negotiability that stems from a relationship, an institutionalized relationship between two individuals. Another kind of non-negotiability stems from social settings of interactions. The same thing, you can institutionalize a relationship between collectives, between groups, between organizations. One political party, I give the example of a socialist party, don't ask me why, may have a commitment to another political party, to the European Socialist Party. And if you try to negotiate now with the French Socialist Party a new trade agreement for France, but the French Socialist Party has already committed to certain trade limitations to the European Socialist Party, it doesn't matter what you put on the table. It doesn't matter. And you need to identify that first, to map it carefully, and only then to move on. There are non-negotiabilities that come from the societal divisions of resources and power. Resources matter, interests matter. Obviously, you can try to negotiate someone to give you a higher price than the money that they have, but if they don't have more money, it's just non-negotiable. And this is very simplistic, but we see it in more complex ways. We see sometimes conflicts which are characterized perhaps primarily by oppressive power structures. Most of the colonial conflicts, one nation controls another nation, dominates their lives, oppresses them. The dominated nation then finds it impossible when it is asked to legitimize the dominating party. And it doesn't matter if it's Gandhi in India, he can't legitimize British rule over India. So we need to take seriously also non-negotiabilities that stem from distribution of resources and of power. And another source, which is really relates not to power, but to worldview differences, to our cultures, and to our collective beliefs. Our beliefs, our worldviews can differ dramatically. Some of us may have a liberal, secular worldview. Some of us have an anti-liberal religious worldview. Some of us may be US evangelicals or Israeli Zionists or whatever it is. And these worldviews are anchored in very different, sometimes very different sets of laws, for instance. They also can be future-oriented or past-oriented. They can have different values. They can have different terminologies. And we see that these worldview differences introduce dramatic rigidities, non-negotiabilities. And you can see again and again that you can make a very beneficial proposal to a conflict party, and that conflict party will reject it, even though you give it more resources, because the way in which that proposal is framed contradicts with their own understanding of who they are, who this group is, and what it is all about. It compromises their moral understanding of who they are, and therefore they will reject it. Former President Trump, perhaps again future President Trump, was very surprised when he made what he thought was a very generous pro-Israeli proposal, something called the Trump Plan, and it was rejected by the Israeli leadership of the settlements and characterized as an anti-Israeli proposal. And whoever wrote that proposal failed to understand their worldview and how it did not cohere with Jewish law, at least their understanding of Jewish law. And we saw the same with many conflict parties across the world, Palestinians and Indonesians and so on. And one final source of non-negotiability I suggest in the typology relates to protected values, to values that people believe should be protected from compromise at all costs. And groups come to hold such beliefs. Groups not only come to hold such beliefs, they oftentimes also self-define, they also shape their own identity. The fact that we are the ones that don't eat pork, or we are the ones who don't drive on Shabbat, or we are the ones who will never give up on whatever corner of Armenia, or we are the ones, this is who we are. It's not just something we don't do or do. It's who we are, it's constitutive to our identity. And when you offer us money, or where you want to give us some alternative piece of land for this, you just don't understand who we are and you offend us. This is non-negotiable. Oliver was before me, so we can speak about England. I don't know that many English people will be willing to give up on London in order to make peace with their neighbors. They might be willing to give up on other parts of their land, but some parts are constitutive for our identity. And we therefore believe that they are non-negotiable. Why do I suggest different kinds of non-negotiability? Because I think it helps us understand the sources of opposition. It helps us see whether we should try to resolve a conflict or only try to regulate it, to transform it. It helps us avoid unintentional harm. And in terms of analysis, I try to point out that a conflict can be characterized by several phenomena of non-negotiability. They may, of different types, and they may even intersect. In conflicts that are particularly intractable, I think we can identify this intersection. It could be clashing institutional commitments that overlap with power-based limitations, that also intersect with overlapping protected values, and so on. So what do we do with this mess? What do we do with the fact that sometimes so much of people's conduct has become non-negotiable? We believe it is non-negotiable, or we committed ourselves to a non-negotiable position. So I'm trying to say here something that is maybe, at least in my own mind, still paradoxical. I do want to say that it is possible to try and unlock it, but I don't think that it is always possible to unlock, and I don't think it is always desirable to unlock. I'll try to explain. But first, I'll say that this work that some of us are engaged in conflict transformation or conflict resolution, peace building, has been compared to the creative work of artists, of carpenters. You need to be imaginative, creative, and envisage a new reality. When I think of unlocking, I want to suggest another analogy of a plumber that deals with the clogged pipes, the water pipes, sewage pipes, whatever it is. And as long as it's clogged, you can't deal with the flow of whatever liquid it is over there. And it's very important to have people who try to unlock, to be plumbers for social systems. Because sometimes when it's clogged, you are unable to coexist next to whoever it is that you live to. I think that this focus on unlocking requires shifting, however, from trying immediately to resolve to first saying we need to do plumbing first and only then resolving, right? We need to think of it at least sequentially. But when I say that it's not necessarily desirable, what I mean by this is, as I referred to before, there are reasons that we commit ourselves to non-negotiable positions. There are reasons that we choose to hold beliefs about an absolute commitment to a certain value. There are deep reasons that human beings are doing this, I think, for millennia. And I don't think that people who try to deal with conflicts should ignore these reasons. On the contrary, I think we should come from the perspective of acknowledging them, respecting them, trying to understand why conflict parties hold these things so dearly, and find a way to work with this sentiment rather than against it. And if we try to unlock by getting rid of this sentiment, we will encounter the same resistance that resolution will probably encounter. It's very adequate that I don't think that everything can be commodified, that I don't think that I'm willing to sell everything for more money. It's just fine that societies have morality, and that perhaps some of us believe that no matter how much money is offered, human organs should not be sold. Perhaps some of us think differently. And perhaps prostitution should be banned, and so on and so forth. And it's okay to hold to that belief in an absolute manner. Similarly, especially perhaps in non-liberal worldviews, there are deep commitments, not only to not commodifying individuals, human beings, but to other things, to the divine, to a holy site, to the collective. And I think it's extremely important that these things exist, and I think we should try to work with them again. because I'm trying to claim that you can't just say, here is a non-negotiability, let's unlock it. With your permission, I'm going to skip the section of my paper that deals with how to unlock. And I'm going to jump to the concluding remarks, also to leave more space for our conversation. But I do want to underline that the risks of what I would suggest is solutionism, of coming in and saying, we are trying to pursue a solution. Today, when we say solution, I think for many of us, there is a connotation of finding a harmonious solution. We don't say harmonious, we just say solution. But many of us, I think, hear harmonious solution. Here, this is now resolved, the conflict is over, and you know the Hollywood movies, and that couple is now walking towards the sunset, and the narrator is saying, and they lived happily ever after. And that's, you know, all of us, anyone, one of us who is married, I think, knows that that's oftentimes not what married life is like. And the relationships are filled with conflict. And we need to be careful with a utopian image of solution. And I think that the conflict transformation mindset is more helpful there in that sense, that it tells us that what we are trying to do is to change, to shift the nature, the contours of a conflict to a different kind of conflict, maybe a more limited one, maybe a less violent one. Because it is still a relationship, it probably still has conflicts. I say this also because unlocking, even to the extent that you can pursue it successfully, takes time. And while it takes time, you need to help the parties work through that relationship. And then conflict transformation might be more in the zone of partial agreements rather than comprehensive ones, which oftentimes are part of the conflict resolution mindset. Or perhaps even partial agreements that are of an interim, temporary nature. Alternatively, it could be about giving birth to a modus vivendi, to an arrangement that might not even be formal, a set of understandings that respect the contradictory values that the parties to the conflict hold. And the such modus vivendi arrangements or rules that enable peaceful coexistence among stakeholders is extremely important when the stakeholders pursue disparate, colliding political projects. Can we help parties live alongside each other when their political projects contradict each other? I think we can. We see it in democracies. In democracies, political parties champion colliding political projects, and there are institutions that allow for it. But it is a modus vivendi. It doesn't pretend to create harmony. So now, conflict transformation is not necessarily a path toward resolution. I'm not against resolution. If you can resolve everything, it's wonderful. But I don't think, but we need to be very careful about putting forward that prospect. And I guess the rest we can leave to the discussion. What I made in conclusion, what this is all about from my point of view is an attempt to take existing work like Oliver's about radical disagreements, which acknowledges that sometimes differences are there and we need to operate based on that acknowledgement. Kelman's work that acknowledges that people are not infinitely malleable and we need to take that into account. And in a way, we almost need like, I don't know, non-negotiability studies to develop. And I, again, just think that we are at the beginning of this. I'm sure that what I just presented are initial thoughts and not more. And I look forward to the conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you, dear Ofer, so much for this excellent paper. And I see that there are so many interesting points of conversion and similarities to the first paper. But it's not my job to discuss this. This is Susan. And Susan, may I ask you immediately to start? I think it's not easy, even if you could prepare something. You have just listened now to this, especially to Ofer's paper, and so it's your job now to answer a question, but even more to raise more questions, I guess.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
comments. So please
Thank you
come
so
on.
much. Yeah, I appreciate, thank you, Ofer, for your presentation, and I will send my thanks also to Oliver for his video that he's shared with us. And I want to thank also, University of Graz, Kelman Institute, University of Denver, and Professor Tamara Pearson-Destray, who edited this book that has brought us all together. And thank you, Werner and Max, for today's session. Really helpful presentations and sobering also. I took from Oliver Ramsbotham's presentation the importance of, he mentioned starting where the parties are, not where we external peace builders, if we put ourselves in that situation and for this discussion, but not where the external peace builders want them to be. And that's where I see a commonality between Ofer's paper and Oliver's paper there, that there's an acknowledgement of the current realities as they are rather than as we wish they would be. And that's a powerful process. That's a powerful practice to be able to, and I think we can go back to John Paul Lederach's work on moral imagination, where we should be rooted in the current realities, not just in some imagination, but rooted in the current realities as a part of where we start when we are envisioning building towards a future. I also, I listened to these two presentations, having first read a haiku that I received this morning from Tatsushi Arai, who is a faculty member at Kent State University. And Tatsushi, I'm going to just put a link in the chat here to this haiku, which gives me a little bit of perspective as I listened to these two presentations. So this goes into the chat, and then I will read you his haiku. He published on Transcend Media because yet last week, after last week's session, we had a partial and for some people total eclipse in the United States for going across North America. And so here at the Carter School, a bunch of us went outside, and we had the glasses that allow staring at the sun. And here in Washington, D.C., we had an 87% eclipse, which was enough of a phenomenon to kind of put in perspective, like, where are we on this earth? And in relation to the sun and the moon and so forth. Well, Tats was closer to totality in Ohio. And so his haiku says, "The solar eclipse, a miracle of the vast and wondrous universe. Why do we fight on this small planet?" So with that haiku, putting things in perspective, and I think just asking us to, if I take from both Oliver and Ofer's chapters in this book, asking us to acknowledge the current realities and not wish them to be different as a way of somehow magically shifting things, but to acknowledge where are we first, and then asking why do we fight. And I think, Ofer, what you've presented is non-negotiability is real. People really do hold dearly to certain perspectives. And to acknowledge that is a starting point towards constructively engaging. I'll also mention Angela Lederach's work on slow peace. Peace is not a magical, quick thing in the work that she's done, particularly in Colombia, where she's looked at communities that are developing peace slowly, and they recognize that this is a slow process and that they're not wanting to necessarily move faster. And Angela Lederach's work was acknowledged just a week or two ago at the International Studies Association convention, where she received one of the Emerging Scholar Awards there from the Peace Studies section. So that I feel like there are lots of strands coming together in our field that are commenting on quick fixes could, as Ofer put it, could do harm, and we want to avoid doing harm. And that means acknowledging the complexities and the difficulties. And not doing, Ofer, the way you put it, people might try to broker between conflict parties like you would between children. And that's not effective. When we bring that kind of a paternalistic attitude, it is not effective. It does not recognize the agency of people or call on people to be fully engaged in constructive approaches. The partial transformative steps, mutually beneficial ways forward, reminds me of the approach of functional coexistence, which again, going to Tatsuya Rai, he and Margarita Tedevosian are pulling together an edited book on the functional coexistence concept, looking at kind of what are the positives of an enduring negative peace and an enduring non-resolution where parties might deny the opponent's legitimacy, but they allow some functional society to continue. They allow some basics of food, healthcare, education, etc., even though they may still deny the opponent's legitimacy. And so they're Tatsuya Rai, Margarita Tedevosian, looking at functional coexistence as a positive when we may think we're looking for positive peace, but maybe negative peace is all we can get, and let's support what the best we can do in certain situations. So I'd be interested, Ofer, for your comments on any of this that resonates with you. We can't ask Oliver to comment now, but hopefully he'll get some feedback from the session, and we'll get his comments in some other format in some way. And then Ofer, I know you skipped the how to unlock part, but I think that would be really useful to share some if you're willing to share a bit of that as well. So I can come back with further comments at another stage, but I think that's all for now.
Ofer, it's definitely your part.
Definitely, okay. So this is tremendous. I'm very interested by all of the comments Susan just made. I like the word sobering. I like slow peace, and I'm not surprised that it's a Lederach. So as far as I understand, Lederachs usually do conflict transformation rather than resolution. This is what I mean. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know enough. And I didn't know about functional coexistence as a concept, and I'll definitely read. It's very much in line with the literature I have been studying about, as I described, about modus vivendi and about I discussed with Wilfried Grafus here concepts of agonistic conflict, agonistic democracy by Mouffe. So how do we structure life around conflict rather than try to make conflict disappear? And I am happy that Susan brought to the fore the question of legitimacy. For me, it's related to the notion of harmony. We tend to, in some parts of Western thought, we tend to think that peace involves legitimizing the other, fully legitimizing the other. And I think we should be actually doubtful about that full mutual recognition is the most emblematic thing of peace. In the sense that, from the perspective of worlds of meaning, fully acknowledging the legitimacy of the other can undercut the degree to which I'm committed to the truth that I educate my child to. How can I explain why I teach my child to be Israeli rather than Japanese? Except for by virtue of being born here, we can also relocate. Or belonging to a certain nation, to a certain religion, to a certain culture. And as we know, many people shy away from trying to endow others with full legitimacy, rather than caveated, reserved, and so on. And sometimes the notion of legitimizing an alternative is really risky from a pedagogical point of view, is complicated from a pedagogical point of view. And I think this, maybe this is where the haiku that you shared with us, from one perspective, from one angle of it, it gives us perspective. We zoom out, we look at ourselves from the moon, and it's wonderful to think think about the point in all of it. And I think the risk of that is that it may draw us too far away from human beings, in the sense that basic human needs theory fundamentally tries to say that human beings are at the center, are the main thing we supposedly need to care most about when we try to address conflict dynamics, as far as I understand. And I think even that sometimes has the limitation of placing, in fact, at the center individual human beings and their individual needs. And what I think comes across when we deal with at least some of the types of non-negotiability here is that we need to deal also with non-negotiables that stem from collectives. And this is perhaps most evident in what I touched upon as collective beliefs, collective protected values. The notion that we prioritize the individual over the collective is far from being neutral or innocent. It scares many groups. It threatens many groups. It is viewed as a process of atomizing societies. Groups that prefer to give a higher room in their hierarchy of values to their existence as groups, as a nation, as a culture, as a religion, as a race, as whatever it is. And I think that we do want to deal with the ways in which this may lead to oppressing others and all of the rest of it. We don't want to just relativize and say that any belief is acceptable. And I hope all the rest of it in this conversation goes without saying. But I think we need to find ways to work with conflicts that acknowledge and legitimize the fact that some groups place a higher priority on collective needs and values, collective interests sometimes, in relation to individual ones. So that's that, and I'm not sure, I'm tempted, but maybe Werner, you can tell me whether to give a few examples of unlocking or to leave that to the avid readers. I don't know how much time we have.
I think we have really much time, and I guess Susan is also patient. I think you will continue after. And on the other hand, there are so many questions for the audience as well. But if you continue with your unlocking and your ideas about unlocking, I think this would be fine.
Thank you. So I'll try to do it briefly and without saying things about the examples. I'll just share a few examples and hopefully they speak for themselves. I related previously to the example of two employees who work together and they meet at that last hour before one of them has to rush home to take care of her son or her father or whatever it is. To put it very simply, this is locked because of an external commitment. Is there a way to involve that caretaker or the teacher of the son, or we need to find a third party in order to unlock a third party to which an external commitment was made? And you go out of the workspace. Usually it's your boss. What can you tell him? Please talk to the caretaker of your mother. It's locked. It's not something that is easy. It's not a part of the conversation that is legitimate. So it might be conceivable that you can unlock it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that practically you can unlock it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to actually tell your boss to change that, or even to tell your employee to change that. In a similar way, if you are that French Socialist Party and you want to do now a trade agreement with Germany or with Spain, you need to, and Spain wants now more wine to be sold to Spain, more French wine, you need to go to the European Socialist Party and involve them. And that too can be highly complex and may violate social taboos. And it may violate their values. There is a reason that they made that commitment. And you may find yourself now negotiating, of course, with the Polish Socialist Party and the rest of it. With respect to the example I gave on colonial conflicts and whether it's possible to give some legitimacy to the colonial party and whether you at all want to do that. And so maybe to go to slightly less controversial examples, in some conflicts, we see that a party is perceived to be colonial, but that party doesn't view itself as colonial. So in Northern Ireland, as you know, Ulsterites, perhaps those coming originally from Scotland, some of the Republicans would characterize them as not indigenous. They would dispute it. What do you do there? And I think in such conflicts, you may be able to, the more you remove to a significant degree oppression of the group that views itself as indigenous and fighting against colonial rule, the more it might be able to reward, with a limited way, some legitimacy of the other side. But again, if you try to do it with a big bang approach, I think that might falter. If we look at worldviews and their differences, and I want now the Taliban to accept a certain proposal, and we are, whoever it is now, we are in the White House. I need to think first how to align that proposal with their interpretation of the Sharia. And if I don't take the time to do that, then good luck to all of us. Because they are educated. Now, I may think that interpretation of the Sharia is abominable, so I may not want to do it. I'm just saying where they are locked. I'm not saying, again, that it is desirable. But if you want to unlock it, you need to find something that is aligned with their understanding of the world. They invest tremendous efforts in teaching their children this, that, and the other. And they're not going to do global politics in contradiction to that. And we don't have to go all the way to extreme examples like the Taliban for this. Law, liberal international law, is something that some of us would not give up on. And if non-liberal groups want liberals among us to align with the proposal, they need to make sure that it can be aligned both with liberal values and with international law. Otherwise, it will be rejected. And finally, with respect to this notion of protected values, meaning the belief a group holds that something is non-negotiable, the belief that many examples, the belief in, Wilfried told me about Sri Lanka, the belief that a group holds that Sri Lanka has to be united under the rule of one nation. It doesn't matter how you propose now to divide the territory, if it's 80-20, or if it's 70-30, or if it's 40-60. They believe it's all theirs. So if you don't start with unlocking it, you're wasting your time. And you can check with them, what does it mean that they fully control it? Does it mean that their flags are everywhere? Does it mean that their police is everywhere? Is there room for dialogue over that? Hermeneutics can be very valuable here. Reinterpretation of tradition. But that assumes that they continue to believe that their rule over the entire land is in effect, is respected, and they might then refine these values in ways that permit certain political realities that otherwise are prevented. So this is as quick as I can, a few examples.
Thank you very much, Ofer. So I think this keyword was hermeneutics now, and this shows that every plumber is also an artist, and every artist should be a plumber. I think so. So Susan, it's now up to you. Do you want to continue, or should we first, let's say, audience ask their question or their statements?
Yeah, I think no substantive comments from me now, just to say thank you, Ofer. I really appreciate your responses. And I appreciate you also sharing a bit of the unlocking and what I see with the unlocking. I guess I will say one thing, Werner, before we go to audience comments and questions. One of the things I see with the unlocking is the power of acknowledging what is. And that's going back to the way Oliver put it about starting where the parties are, and so that's part of the Kelman's legacy of doing a engagement with parties and a shared analysis and analyzing together to really understand what is the current reality. And so in the examples you've given, what are the worldviews, what are the protected values, what are the external commitments people have made, that those sorts of acknowledging those things as part of what we consider allows us to then be effective in considering them. Whereas sometimes people will have on blinders and kind of limit try to do an analysis that leaves out whole sections of what's really going on. And so that's part of the complexity lens too here. Yeah, so thank you, Ofer.
Thank you so much, Susan, also for this contribution. We start now with a discussion, and we have already Max, who is the first to ask or to comment or whatever. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Ofer, for this presentation with from my perspective, a really sympathetic approach that is really realistic and does not aim at an idealistic total resolution of the whole issue. And I just wanted to ask, wherein there's several approaches that embrace this kind of realism. The extreme position, more or less, what I would say, this school of non-resolution tied to Catherine Bell, that more or less tries to find the least terrible solutions that allow people to kind of breathe and live until something that could be eventually called the best possible solution. And I had the impression that hermeneutics does play some kind of role here. So the way that you frame a certain solution, where in this spectrum would you see yourself more, well, and might you be able to relate it to your current work? Because I know it's not possible to fully disclose this, as is is a mediation initiative behind closed doors, but I had always had the impression that you kind of referred to specifics of the sacred that is also indivisible. You cannot negotiate about the sacred, because it is the sacred or it is not the sacred. You already also referred to Sharia and to Taliban, that will also not negotiate about rejecting the sacred. Also for our students to be able to make it a little bit more well, to make it a little bit more accessible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ofer?
Thank you very much. So I first, to Werner's point about are we plumbers or artists, I think I'm happy to be both, but I'm a very bad artist. I don't know how to draw to save my life. But I want to explain just that my intention before was to say, it doesn't matter what I think about Sri Lankan tradition as a mediator. No one will respect me telling them that, they have to do that creative part of it. What I think the mediators or the, conflict, whoever we are, need to do is to create a conversation in which they feel that if they were to do so, it would be relevant, it would be impactful. And currently, the pipe is clogged in the sense that even if they put forward a different interpretation, people might not listen to them at all. And people are not approaching them, and they are excluded, and maybe they self-exclude. So just to explain on that, I'm not, Max, thank you for this question. I'm not familiar with Catherine Bell, but it certainly rings like important work. It reminds me of John Gray's work, and some post-liberal thinkers who basically become very pessimistic about what is possible and the ability of human beings to identify any common values. And without that, really striving just for so-called least terrible solutions is better than horrible reality. Again, as you heard, I'm not a big fan even of the word least terrible solutions, but to try to create a new reality, a new modus vivendi, a new whatever it is, we can I think of the term. Because if we just call it still terrible and end solution, concretely, We are now when we go between conflict parties here in Jerusalem, there are such big gaps between them that when we come with any one of the proposed solutions to the others, the conversation just basically collapses. We can't really create trust. One side says 2 states, another one says 1 state, a third one says 5 states. And as soon as you table that thing, I don't want to say you are ejected from the office, but in many ways, the conversation in the fruitful sense of the word is over. And this is true also for when we try to come up with the arrangements on access to a holy site in Jerusalem. If we start from some kind of wishful idealist thinking mode, rather than from reality and slowly how it could be improved, we encounter much more pushback. It might be different in other conflict arenas where the discrepancies between the conflict parties are lesser, and that's wonderful. But here, to use Oliver's terms, where there is a radical disagreement, where it's very difficult to create any kind of linguistic bridge, because then you lose the essence of what the conflict party is fighting over. They say they want a state. Don't tell them that they just want a limited sovereignty. You just lost what they are all about, is an example Oliver gives, and I think rightly so. So I think it's trying to think if there is another example that helps. Yeah, most of them are sensitive, so I'm sorry I'm unable to offer very easy examples, but I'll just say that this notion of a slow peace, I like it, because what we see is that change really, sometimes the most important part, how should I put it? When I leave the room of whoever I met, that security official, that rabbi, that sheikh, and I try to ask myself what just changed thanks to this conversation. More often than not, it's something that was in the dynamic in the room rather than in the content of the conversation. There is a gradual shift, new questions that person now allows themselves to ask, or things like this. And again, when we approach it from the perspective of a solution, of an end goal that we supposedly aspire to, that basically there is pushback and the dynamic in the room is different. But thank you very much.
Thank you. The next one is Wilfried, and then I have also a question.
Yes, hello, this is Gudrun from Wilfried's device. And I would like to thank Oliver and Ofer for your presentations. And I have a very simple, but probably also tricky question to you. It's how do these two concepts, embracing radical disagreement and respecting the non-negotiable, how would you say does it relate to each other? Or how do they relate to each other? Because on one hand, it sounds very similar, and on the other hand, I think there is a difference. So yeah, would be curious to hear your answers. Thank you.
Ofer?
I'm now even more sorry that Oliver is not here, because I would have been very interested by his response. I think radical disagreement, as I understand Oliver's work, is the linguistic expression, he calls it, of the dispute. Is one side saying, I want to divide the land into 2 states, and the other one is saying, no, all of it is mine. This, and don't move away from it. Use the language that the parties use, and then you hold exactly in your hands what this is all about. And don't try to so to speak, reconfigure it in your own mind. It's only they can do it. So the fact that you suggest to them that in fact what they are after and so on is useless. From that point of view, my feeling is that it is the rhetorical expression of an irresolvable disagreement, at present irresolvable. I think of non-negotiability in the way I presented it as the origins of non-negotiable positions, the origins of a position which is entirely rigid, which is absolute. A non-negotiability in that sense is not relational. It can also exist for a group in and of itself, for an individual as he defines himself or she defines herself. And my need for shelter or for food depends on no one. Our commitment not to eat pork is not because of others in this sense, meaning even if everyone else will stop to eat pork, probably we will continue not to eat pork. It's and I think that and even when they are relational, it's the relationship that creates the non-negotiability, and we can see it, this institutional commitment of conflict parties, for instance, rather than the expressive manifestation of it in a discourse, which I think is what Oliver is drawing our attention to. But this is really at best 50% of an answer because he's not here.
You're always very modest, I see. My question is, I will come back to the hermeneutics because I think this is really key in such an intractable situation. Let's also go back to the basic human needs because I think it was, we could work on this and elaborate more on this because on the one hand, it's very clear that there are basic human needs. You cannot avoid it. On the other hand, all human expressions are culturally shaped. Also, the very natural needs of everybody are culturally shaped. So if you need shelter, it depends on your cultural situation, which shelter is enough for you, which food suffice for you, and so on. And I think this is a gap a little bit between, or not a gap, but in some way a room of maneuver where you can maybe find under some circumstances a way out of unlocking it. So you can present it as according to your needs, but still different from what you thought before. And you had a wonderful example of the Taliban. If you use it now for the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, how would you, can you elaborate on this? Have you some ideas how you can put yourself in the situation of the other in order to maybe unlock the situation? This is my question. Hard question.
Yes, very hard, but a good question. So first, I'm not entirely sure what I mean, how should I put it? So basic human needs exist in the physical sense, at least. Some of others here, Susan can speak more authoritatively about how much we have consensus actually in academic circles about which needs we know exist and which not. But let's take them as constants, as you suggest. So we all need food, we all need shelter. And they are culturally shaped. So with that, we can work. There is some degree of flexibility here, is I think what is implied by your question. I agree. But this specific kind of change, we have to be cognizant, is usually slow. It has taken many years for the Catholic Church to engage in a process that revisited its values relative to the Jewish faith and the Jewish people. But it did so. It was a dramatic exercise of hermeneutics, the Second Vatican Council, and it reshaped relations between two religions in dramatic ways. And again, going back to what I had mentioned about non-negotiability in this sense existing only on one side, in a way it was enough for the Catholic Church to change it, that a lot has changed. It didn't fully require a change on the Jewish side. In Russia and Ukraine, I'll put it simplistically, we can't do justice to this complex conflict here, and I'm not an expert on that conflict. One level of the conflict is that it's not only a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it's also a conflict between Russia and Europe or Russia and the West. In Russia, arguably a school of thought within Russia that seems to be close to Putin talks about Russia as having political relevance in the European continent and not only in the Asian one. And this includes, from that point of view, also the territory of the Ukraine. And this dates back many years. This is not a new figment of one's imagination. And in the Ukraine, also Ukrainians, there is a school of thought, one that grew stronger over the last decade, that sees Ukraine as part of Europe and now specifically part of a liberal Europe and the rest of it. And there is a clash, a contradiction between the two of these. Whether Ukrainian and Russian thinkers and poets want to engage in exercises about what does it mean that Russia has political relevance in Europe. Is it only about exclusive sovereignty? Is it about what does it mean in the cultural field? What does it mean in the realm of social engagement, leagues of sports, all kinds of things? What does it mean? Traditionally, modern sovereignty obviously is new. So there is room to work with because past sovereign models were different. They made allowances that modern ones do not. And if one goes, therefore, into Russian history, sometimes we can find realities that seem inconceivable from the prism of modern sovereignty. And the same for Ukrainians. Does it mean being, obviously there is currently a very pressing war and a sense of offense and a sense of intrusion and everything that we can read about and know. I think that there is a question about the degree to which they engage also with the Russian space out of their own will, given Ukrainian history. And again, this can be in realms of sports, it can be in the realm of music, it can be all of the origins that we know that Ukrainian culture had did not come only from Western Europe. But this today is something that I can say from Jerusalem. Today, a Ukrainian and a Russian, of course, would not feel comfortable at all discussing this. So these things are very slow, and to the extent that people from the conflict parties would engage in them, I suspect that they would do it purposefully in a way that would seem to be detached from the relationship to the other side. They would inadvertently suddenly highlight that Ukraine also has an element of a Russian culture. And they would not do it as a result of an overt dialogue with the other side. But they would still be reinterpreting what being Ukrainian is all about, or what being Russian is all about. And this is constitutive of identity and has direct impact on political goals. So hermeneutics from that point of view is extremely potent. But as soon as it seems like hermeneutics is used, as soon as it looks like hermeneutics is abused, is misused in order to corrupt an identity, it will be rejected. And these people will find themselves finding social enforcement and the rest of it. That's my limited suggestion.
Anyway, thank you. This is very useful, I guess. You thought it further. We have now two more comments or questions, but I would like to ask everybody to ask any question or to give any comment, and it doesn't has to be too much elaborated. It can be also a very simple question. Question to repeat something for better understanding and so on. So I really encourage everybody to take the floor. We have enough time. So next is Wilfried. Wilfried, unlock your micro.
Yes. You understand me now? Okay. Good. My question is simple, but I would say most of us, many of us are coming from a specific tradition, this tradition of human basic needs, based conflict resolution, conflict transformation, and not only, and mutual recognition of these basic human needs of all of us. So our imagination of a good solution, of a transforming process, was finding solutions based on the mutual recognition of the individual basic human needs of all of us. And this was not only analysis, but this was also a value behind. The value was basic human needs for all of us. So now we are confronted with two very powerful concepts criticizing this, or this tradition, criticizing the concept of mutual recognition, criticizing the concept of focusing on basic needs alone. These concepts are radical disagreement and non-negotiability. I think these two concepts are very powerful, and they were very rich contribution for our Harvard conferences, because to some extent both were new in our field. But then a lot of misunderstandings and confusions arise between some of us, especially between Gudrun and me, Ofer and me, for example, Werner, Wintersteiner and us, about this concept of basic human needs. The idea was, for example, we were confronting with a contradiction. The critics were saying your work mutual recognition doesn't work anymore, and individual needs doesn't work anymore. There are collective sacred values. So one thing to reconcile this contradiction was maybe to find out different levels. For example, the level of collective values is not the same as the level of individual needs, and maybe we can translate between these two levels. For example, maybe is religion or a protected value is maybe a deeper basic needs, but this didn't work either, because it brought us back to this question of individual needs, and individual needs are not enough. So what this mean at the end for our praxeology? And the only thing for the moment, I can find out what does this mean for the praxeology is giving up with constructing solutions, giving up from bringing solutions from the outside to the local people, focusing on deep hermeneutical work over many years, and supporting the conflict parties, the local conflict parties themselves, to come up with their approaches to reconcile values and needs. So this would be my question to Ofer now. Is this that I describe this praxeology coming out from this complexifying of this problem of needs and values? Is this the right approach, or did you find different praxeologies, different methods, different tools to work with it?
Susan, you want to ask a question now, or I reply now? I don't understand how to do it.
I think it's so complex that it's better to reply directly.
Okay.
And then the next question will be also complex, and the question of Nadia as well, and so on.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
so I think it's better in this case.
So, so my answer, Wilfred, is actually to follow your own contribution. And I don't think we should give up on necessarily on mutual recognition. I think in some conflicts it can be possible, and that's good. Mutual recognition doesn't mean that it's symmetrical, right? It means, I don't know, Judaism and Islam or whatever it is. And there are different ways in which it could happen. And I do think that the mutual recognition approach, and I think you elucidated it all very well, like the premises of the approach so far, there was also in the thinking about how to do mutual national recognition. So this is part of the traditional thinking. And I think within nationalist thinking, that's it still has some relevance. I do meet influential nationalist leaders who are willing to make big sacrifices in order to have national acknowledgement from the other side. I don't think we can just get rid of this. I think we need to expand the set of possible options. And I think we need to offer conflict parties, help them think and imagine also agreements in which they do not need to recognize the other and legitimize it. Maybe only partly, maybe only temporarily. The same notion, but not necessarily. And if they both tell us, or all three or all 10, whatever conflict parties, that their preference is to coexist with each other in a world that they experience as a monist one, not one that has several truths, but one in which they believe there is only one. Power to them. I don't think we should impose our biases on them. And the biggest challenge, I think, and this is where maybe there is somewhat of an impasse, is if we had only groups that are very monist in terms of their tendencies in a conflict, then they would both say, let's do a non-recognition agreement, and we are very happy. I can claim, I can pretend, I can live in a world in which it's all mine. He can tell himself that it's all his, and we live next to each other. And if it was all liberal universalist, it would have been the other thing. The problem is that the societies are heterogeneous. They involve both, let's call it schematically secular liberals and religious non-liberals. And here I think a major issue is whether there could be, whether it's possible to have several narratives that justify the agreement. We want to find a way to help conflict parties, so to speak, sell the conflict, explain we want to help conflict parties explain the agreement in disparate, different ways. Some of them will say that this agreement is about mutual recognition, and some of them will say that it is not. And this is maybe just fine. Maybe it is about mutual national recognition, but not about mutual religious recognition. And the more we manage to carve space for conflict parties to explain to their constituencies the agreement that was reached within their own worldview, the better it is. We want to, this Indian fable about the blind man and the elephant, and each of them touches another part of the elephant and they describe a different animal. We want to create elephants, and we want the conflict party, and the conflict parties want to be blind men, not in the sense that they don't see, in the sense that human beings are different. And as Werner said, this is culturally shaped. So we are lucky. Some people tend to see tails and some people tend to see trunks. And we should try to leverage this when we try to help the parties reach agreements.
Thank you. Susan, since maybe it's not so much time anymore, would you agree that we take 2 questions?
Okay.
And then, so you and Nadia, and then Ofer replies, and then the next round.
Great. Well,
Is it okay for you?
Thank you. That's fine. And let's see, I did unmute. Good. Thank you, Ofer. Really appreciating this conversation. And as I'm listening to you, and the emphasis on the differences between, going back to Wilfred's question around basic human needs, the differences between the individual basic human needs and the group basic human needs, and acknowledging that we're also considering both, in that both are acting on how we experience conflicts and the possibilities of conflict resolution. So in hearing your distinction there, and then thinking about Russia, Ukraine right now, my question to you is around this term about space. I keep hearing the word space here and then in other conversations, particularly around Russia, Ukraine. The question about where is there space available where people are ready to engage in discussions across the Russia-Ukraine divide. And in some places, I hear that there is no space for negotiating at the, from some particularly from some Ukrainians who speak about peace building. And then on the other hand, I hear that there is space on particular issues, on particular humanitarian needs, on particular, getting children home to their families or particular specifics. And so I guess I would ask you in terms of the locking and the unlocking and the non-negotiables, when there are non-negotiable areas where there's not space for engaging directly on these non-negotiable things, what's the in what ways can it be constructive to engage where there is space and on the particular issues or the particular kinds of things? And I guess one of my hopes would be that there would be more space in this world and that we could come up with a conflict transformation approach, or whether we call it slow peace or functional coexistence or acknowledging non-negotiables, et cetera, that we would be able to come up with a way that norms of protecting life would take a priority, even while we can acknowledge that there are non-negotiables out there and that there are areas that are not open for discussion now, but that there could be some engagement on specific life protecting approaches. So I would ask you to comment on those thoughts. Thank you.
On the space as a metaphor and as a real space. Thank you. Nadia, please unlock your micro and your statement. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would love to thank the reporters and actually say I'm very grateful to be here to hear your discussions and to be part of it. And I want to share about some thoughts about Ukraine and Russia, as I'm Ukrainian. And right now I'm located in Ukraine, in Kharkiv. It's eastern part, so quite hot here. Sometimes, actually, today we already had missile attacks. And I want to share some thoughts from how it is felt from inside about what is going on. So first of all, I support Ofer's thought about, well, it is important to separate conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and actually reality that it is conflict not only between Russia and Ukraine, and the discourse is broader. And honestly, from the just regular citizens of Ukraine, it is not seen like this. So I would add, to move us closer to the negotiation, to some peace building, it should be honestly discussed between the government and the society, that people, it is not only about us, because most Ukrainians are still living in a bubble, like we are fighting with the enemy, Russia is the enemy, and we will conquer enemy, and everything will be good. Like there is a final point. And also what is about the speed of the conflict, regular Ukrainian is does not see the whole picture. So people are expecting fast solutions. And actually this brings a lot of frustration around the society. And well, it in case if right now government goes to the negotiation about some peace, it will be bad peace for everyone. Well, we understand it. And internal group of people will not support it. So it is important also what was said by Ofer, that we should separate like groups of people, some people from government who are ready to negotiate, some people who are not ready, and just a mass of people who will not support like the decision if someone says them tomorrow, okay, we make peace with Russia, we give them part of the territory, and there are a lot of widows right now, and what for? Our soldiers were dying already, hundreds of thousands. So these are my thoughts, which I wanted to share, and thank you very much for letting me word.
Thank you, Nadia. This was very interesting and also very important for us to listen to you. Ofer, it's now up to you.
I'll be brief, so maybe we can get another question. So thank you, both of you. Susan, I think it's a great line of inquiry. I'll say about, I'm not sure about, so first, so let me put it from the other side. Space for what? Space for negotiations might be non-existent. This is why I talk about non-negotiables. Space for humanitarian means you don't yet have to negotiate whose land this is. You need to deal with human beings. So there is space, scarcity space in this case. I do want to say that the scarcity space is shaped by taboos. And the study of taboos is extremely important, how they evolve, how they shift, not necessarily how they erode and disappear. I think we see that uninational or intra-group conversations can deal with taboos. It's possible to speak about something among your group, but not with others. Sometimes it's only a segment of your society that can discuss, and there is more space. And as we've discussed the importance of hermeneutics, this is extremely important. You can actually redefine what you're all about and what you're pursuing in a very gentle, slow way. Sometimes, yeah, okay, now there's a caveat to all of this slowness. I do want to say that in some societies and some institutions, we have authorities that are endowed with the capacity and the authority to quickly reshape an identity, to quickly redefine a worldview. I gave the example of the Catholic Church. It took 3 years, the cardinals came together, and Catholicism relative to Judaism changed after 2 millennia. It's a remarkable thing. And sometimes we, in liberal, highly individualized worldviews, we have less of that. But sometimes it is a remarkable fighter who endured, or a widow, or whoever, that have that moral authority. And it's very important to harness this in order to expand the space. And to Nadia, I wish I knew more about the Ukraine in order to respond in a meaningful way. I do want to say this question of, in economists call it sunk costs, this very important question of why did our people die? And how can I justify a change of strategy when people have died? And more have died. And here again, I think hermeneutics can be extremely important in two senses. One is, what exactly did they die for? What were they trying to? It's not so obvious, because maybe the government said that they were trying to do something. Maybe all kinds of things are possible actually around that conversation. And second, there are deep questions of commemoration to make sure that this was not done in vain, and to acknowledge the cost that they have paid for the nation or for the group, which does sometimes help, in fact, to carry forward the values that they believed in, that we want to make sure that our children are educated in light of these values in the future. Because the sunk costs, oftentimes in this context, they come with a collective trauma. Many people died. It's not one individual. And the collective, in my research, my PhD was about protected values in conflict. So it's about a specific kind of non-negotiables. And what I saw, at least in my research, is that the genesis of protected values, of these collective beliefs that something is non-negotiable, oftentimes comes from a collective trauma. Then we say, this thing is non-negotiable for us. Now we have to make some kind of historic corrective. And work on this, that is at the level of meaning, again, of hermeneutics, of narrative, of why we did it and what does it mean, has then a therapeutic impact, not only conflict sensitive, relevant impact.
Nadia, would you like to add something or reply?
Well, thank you very much, Ofer. Well, of course, it is valuable. I think you're right, and it all goes to that question which I mentioned before. It is about dialogue between the government and the society, about clear explanation of the thoughts, what they died for, why we are coming to this decision right now, why let's stop. So we want to prevent future deaths, future violence, just to protect also our bad peace is better than uncontinuous war, and we all will die. So it should be communicated, but right now, unfortunately, in Ukraine, it is not communicated properly, and still from the government goes the narrative that we should we should win somehow in this war. I don't know how, and actually what is this win will be. So unfortunately, the situation is like this.
Thank you. And next was Shiva, but I do not see her again.
Hi, I'm here. Yeah,
Ah, here you are. Wonderful.
I am from Tel Aviv, Israel. So many questions, but maybe one, I'm asking, where can we find the beginning of a bridge between two sides where everything that have been said in the last few years by, for example, the Hamas about their intentions and about their ideology has proven right in the 7th of October, for example. And what do you do when you have in front of you a side that is using religion to actually to explain the world, that has no, I mean, non-negotiable values is their entire universe. This is what they are based on. There is no entry point. And me as an Israeli who is interested in conflict resolution, and all of my life I believe that there is someone to talk with. It's the first time in my life I see that these non-negotiable values are really a blockage. So where do you start with that? What do you do with that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Max, I guess we can have 5 minutes more. Would be no problem. So Ofer can answer and I can close the session. Is it okay for you? Okay. So Ofer, these two more or less or not related questions.
Thank you, Werner. So I think to Shania's question, indeed, we sometimes see in conflicts an extremely deep level of both dehumanization and action that follows up on it. And as you say, there is the Israel preventing the entry of humanitarian aid through its territory, and the acts of 7 of October themselves from the side of Hamas are obvious examples. I don't see that, how shall I put it? I'm afraid to say that we've seen worse. We've seen conflicts in such stages, and we nevertheless saw that societies have amazing capacity to recuperate. And I don't say it as if it involves no effort. There are a lot of processes that can be put in place also to support such recuperation. Social psychology is very important. Individual psychology is very important. And then relational issues. But just from the perspective of non-negotiability, I think maybe your question also actually in this sense is linked to Shira's. Maybe the collective trauma of the population in Gaza will lead them to embrace this worldview that Shira was talking about, that maybe has a central non-negotiable belief about the duty to violently resist the existence of the state of Israel. From the perspective of our topic today, of non-negotiability, what I can say, so first I think it's analytically, this is where trauma may lead to, and this is clearly collective trauma for both societies now. And we will see what kind of non-negotiables are born in both societies. It's too soon to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if that will be the case. I think more directly to Shira's question, sometimes, and again, historically, sometimes such groups are defeated militarily. And a lot of people are studying now in Israel, they're studying what happened with Japan and Germany during the Second World War, as you know. But assuming that there isn't an absolute victory, and I think it was Nadia who said that she doesn't see in Ukraine the possibility of an absolute victory. We know that within Hamas's worldview, while holding on to resistance to Israel as a non-negotiable value, it is possible to reach what they call a hudna, an interim temporary agreement with Israel. I think there is a bigger question within that about whether that time during that period, is that period possibly, can it be used to unlock the non-negotiable belief? Can it be used to refine it? Can it be used to transform it? Can a hudna be a path for more than a hudna? And on this, I can say today, as a matter of fact, that Islamic scholars are divided on this. The majority say that it can lead to something that is more than hudna, that jihad, which opposes another entity, doesn't have to be perpetual. But this may be, we are dealing with violent conflicts of the most brutal kind. So certainly the impact is of generations. These are slow processes. I don't expect these things to be solved in weeks or months. I don't expect them, as you've heard, to be solved. What I look for is ways to transform the conflict, in this case, between Israelis and Palestinians, or into one that is of a different shape. And hopefully, less destructive, less humiliating, more respectful of the other, even if it's without acknowledging their identity. But in effect, in real life, it is less oppressive and less violent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ofer. And thank you for all you have done today. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, all participants of this discussion. I think we discussed very hard questions because the real situations, the conflicts, the wars are so hard and also touching to us. But I guess your concept was really an eye-opener. For me, at least, it was an eye-opener when I first heard about and learned about this by your paper, for instance. And also today, what you said was so important. Let's take only this criticism of harmony. It is a wisdom of ancient Greek philosophy and poetry that Harmonia is a illegitimate daughter of Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the god of love. And she's all her life a troublemaker, Harmonia. She's not harmonic, she's absolutely the contrary. So we can learn about all this. I believe not only the concepts, but also the question we discussed today will be with us for any next lecture. And so I hope we can continue, and I hope to see you all next week again. Thank you for coming. Thank you for contributing, and have a nice evening, morning, or whatever, lunch, for instance.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Susan, for the wonderful comments. Thank you, Werner.
Thank you, Ofer, Susan, Werner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, all of you.
So, and see you again. It's necessary.
Bye.
Bye.